that's presented. So this is crazy. We have like 1,200 people who have registered to join us over the next 3 weeks, which is really great. And apparently they're from 28 different countries. So we're really excited about this opportunity to share our enthusiasm for neuroscience and our ideas and some of the research that people are working on here. We've tried to design this to provide as much interaction and engagement as you can in a virtual Zoom world, but there are discussion boards, there are breakout sessions, and we'll give you some more information as we go through here. So we really hope that you'll find the experience with the Science Lab to be insightful and engaging. And as you build connections with the other people that you meet online here, we're going to try to create a little global community over these next few weeks, and we hope that we can sustain this into the future. So at this time, I'd like to thank all of the co-sponsors of Neuroscience and Your Behavior. So that's the College of Science, of course. We don't have to thank ourselves, but the Notre Dame College of Arts and Letters, the Notre Dame Center for Social Concerns, and the Notre Dame Alumni Association. Each of these groups have put, and members from each of these groups have put in a huge amount of time and have brought all of their different talents to bring this program to life. And so we hope that you appreciate it and you appreciate them for their support. So let me give you some technical details. So we have a form that we're going to put up so that you have questions for Professor Michael or Professor Mick. This is a Google form, so you can put your questions in there, and the moderator of the session is going to be able to allow to pose those questions and do this in an efficient way. And we're going to try to answer as many of these questions as possible, given the time constraints. But if we don't get to all of them, we have this private moderated discussion board on LinkedIn to continue this discussion. So hopefully that will be in the chat at this point. And so, as I was alluding to before, we like to, now that we're discussing the basics of neuroscience and why experiences and relationships are so important, we're going to have breakout sessions. And so what we're going to do is, after the brief overview from Nancy Michael and Connie Mick, we're going to discuss how the ideas of neuroscience and the types of research that they're talking about really fit in with what the mission of Notre Dame is through the lived portions of spirituality. Then we'll have Notre Dame sophomore, Arafat Aliyi, to discuss how understanding neuroscience and living your faith can provide you with a compassionate perspective of other people. So as I was alluding to before, once the discussion has gone on, we'll have a 15-minute breakout session so that you can meet together. You can meet some of the other people who are online here and discuss today's topic. So this is going to be towards the end of the formal portion of the program, and Professors Michael and Mick will jump into the rooms and be able to talk to you so that you can ask them questions and facilitate a discussion. And so you can leave at this point, or you can participate in the breakout rooms. We hope you will stay, because this is a very effective way of having a discussion in this sort of constrained online environment. So finally, I'd like to introduce Professor Nancy Michael. As you know, when we promoted this event, we shared some pre-recorded videos with Professor Michael and Mick discussing a few of these concepts. And so you may already be familiar with them, but now I'd like to introduce and welcome my colleague and friend, Professor Nancy Michael, to kick off the program. And thanks to all of you who have put a lot of work into this, and I hope it's enjoyable.
Thanks so much, Mike. Yeah, welcome everybody. This is really exciting. Ad nauseum, I'm Nancy Michael, and I am joined by two friends and colleagues, Connie Mick and Arafat Aliyi, and we're really excited to share this experience with you guys. I serve as the Director of Undergraduate Studies for the Neuroscience and Behavior major in the College of Science at the University of Notre Dame. And if my friend Ten Gray is watching, yes, I still need the acronym to shorten that up because it gets really long. I've been at the university for about 6 years, so just as long as the major. But I want to back up a little bit before that, just to acknowledge the fact that when I was in undergrad a couple of decades ago, there was no neuroscience major, there was no neuroscience and behavior major. I didn't even know what neuroscience was. I'd never heard the word before in my lifetime. So it's totally normal, unless that this is your field of study, to have kind of a hazy idea of what the field of neuroscience behavior is really all about. So over the course of the session, we hope to kind of elucidate some of that, make that a little bit more clear. But today I really want to focus on what neuroscience behavior looks like here at the University of Notre Dame. We'll get into it a little bit more, but I think that there's this narrative that lingers out there that like science and religion are not allowed to be friends and they're not allowed to meet. But the more I learn about Catholic social tradition and really get to experience just incredible people of such deep faith, it really is astounding to me at how much neurobiological mechanism supports all of the compassionate service perspectives of so many faith traditions and just morality in general. So without that, let's meet our friends here on the call. Connie and Arafat, do you want to share a little bit about your backgrounds, how you ended up at Notre Dame, and how your interests contribute to your participation with neuroscience and behavior?
Sure. Thanks so much, Nancy. And thanks for folks at the College of Science, and thank ND for inviting us and hosting this important conversation. If you watch the video, on a professional level, I've been at Notre Dame for 22 years now, quite a haul. I'm the Director of Academic Affairs at the Center for Social Concerns. I direct our Poverty Studies interdisciplinary minor. So for that, I teach our Introduction to Poverty Studies and our Capstone for Poverty Studies, and have taught many other community engaged courses over the years. So I met Nancy when she first arrived and was immediately drawn to her, as everyone always is, drawn to her way of framing social concerns and talking about causes and consequences of social problems. So it was clear that this was a faculty member whom we wanted to work with at the CSC, and many of us have. So we're so glad to have her at Notre Dame. On a personal level, I will share that I am a wife and a mother of 2 teenage daughters. I've also been a daughter, and I will share with you that on Sunday, my family finally held a memorial service for my mother, exactly 1 year after it was originally planned and then delayed because of COVID-19. And for those of you who've lost a parent, you might have found, as I did, that remembering and eulogizing your parent takes you back to your own childhood. And my childhood wasn't perfect, and I have some ACEs up my sleeve, not the good kind you want in euchre, the ACE, the adverse childhood experiences kind that neuroscience and behavior helps us understand. Those 10 key adversities that can kind of rewire young brains to adapt to toxic stress. So I know I'm not alone in this audience, as about 61% of adults in the US have had at least one adverse childhood experiences. My childhood home wasn't always safe and stable. And as I reflected on my mother's life and my childhood, I confronted some of those ACEs. Having a scientific lexicon to talk about and understand what you've been through personally is incredibly helpful. And doing that also builds your own capacity for empathy and understanding the challenges that others face. And, through Nancy's help and thinking with neuroscience and behavior, I've been able to bring that into my teaching as well. So just wanted to share that on the personal level. And I think that's one of the unique things about Notre Dame, that we can bring our whole selves to our teaching and to our research. And that makes it stronger and more compassionate and empathetic, I think, in the long run. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you so much, Connie, for sharing a bit about your personal experience too. I know a lot of us can relate to loss, so thanks. Arafat.
Well, guys, thank you first of all for my introduction. I wanted to thank you guys so much for inviting me. It's an honor to be able to speak in front of everyone about my passions of neuroscience and how that has gotten me to where I am today. So
could you
coming my journey. Oh, can you hear me?
Just lean in just a little bit.
Okay. And my experiences coming to Notre Dame, I think was a pretty easy choice to make. I knew that as a high schooler, I wanted to go to a school that would not only enhance my experiences as an academic, but also as my religious experiences. And Notre Dame, their mission to incorporate spirituality and that encouragement to discover your own spirituality while at the school is something that I've highly admired, and really just made the decision easy for me to come and take the school to be something that I'd spent 4 years of my life in. Neuroscience, picking neuroscience as my major was, I think, also another easy choice. The fascination behind the brain and trying to understand why we are who we are, and the belief that we only know such a small percentage of our brain capacity right now is, in a way, I felt as if the brain was calling me to come more and to discover more about its own potentials. So in neuroscience, having a method or being in a community where I can incorporate my learnings, these lessons that I learned in class into real life, and trying to incorporate what I have been taught into helping the community is something that I think is such a beautiful message that is presented to the school and through this department. And it really has made me who I am today. And I'm learning so much already, and I'm still learning more. And I can't wait to see where everything has taken me. And one of this event has been one of the blessings that I've been able to pass by so far.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I would agree. I think we'll get into that a little bit more, but just to echo some of the things that Arafat had said is that being able to be at this school allows us to explore not only questions of faith, but questions of discipline, and the encouragement, and unlike at a lot of other places, to be able to integrate those things together and see where we can find synergies and connections across those. I would also agree with both statements that both Arafat and Connie have made, that understanding brain mechanism offers not only compassion for self, but certainly elevates compassion of others. And so kind of within that, I think on the surface, the field of neuroscience and behavior and the field of something like Catholic social tradition might seem a little bit disparate, right? So Connie, could you tell us a little bit about, like, I think in the writings of our own father, right, he certainly believed that there was absolutely interconnectivity between faith and science. Could you tell our audience a little bit more about the role of the CSC and programs like the Poverty Studies Interdisciplinary Minor, CST, and how these might integrate with the broader mission of CSC?
I'd love to. Yeah. So the CSC has its roots in theology. It was founded by Father Don McNeil and Sister Judith Ann Beatty, and students who wanted to put their faith into action and in a serious and sustained way back in the 1980s. And the CSC remains rooted in God's love in order to enact, right, to do those principles of the Catholic social tradition. And we do that through community engaged research, teaching, and learning. We can't do it alone. We have to do it in partnership. To our core, we are interdisciplinary and partnering as an academic unit. We deeply respect and desire perspectives of our academic and community experts who help us become aware of social concerns that surround us and help us respond with humility, with grace, and toward a positive impact. So our goal at the center is to transform individuals, to advance justice in the common good. And it takes a village to do that. We do not do that alone. It takes all of us bringing our insight and expertise to bear on these wicked, complicated problems. So we're eager at the center to work with faculty from all disciplines and from community members in all domains who are addressing our community's hardest issues, made harder, of course, by COVID-19, homelessness and affordable housing, right? Violence, domestic, group, and random violence. Untreated mental illness, incarceration, and reentry issues, environmental justice, racial justice, of course, criminal justice, and so much more. The CST principle of the preferential option for the poor tells us to go to the margins where people are hurting the most and give them more of our resources. So it's not hard these days to locate the margins. As Pope Francis said, the pandemic has helped us see the poor. And so the Center for Social Concerns, both through its minors in poverty studies and the Catholic social tradition, and through its programs such as the Summer Service Learning Program, International Summer Service Learning Program, Social Concern Seminars, and McNeil Scholars Program, and so much more, seeks to give students that support and provide pathways they need to build understanding and build relationships with individuals and organizations. We really think it's through that solidarity that we advance the common good. we can't effectively address a problem if we don't first understand it, right? We might end up doing more harm than good. So neuroscience and behavior perspective really helps us understand more fully and respond more effectively to all those social concerns. So we always welcome those different perspectives. And likewise, I hope lend our perspective as well, that we hope that neuroscience does neuroscience differently because of the CST that's at Notre Dame, and that this interplay and this connection across the disciplines really elevates the effectiveness of our goals and the outcomes for humankind, really. It's a lofty goal, but where else at Notre Dame would we have that and really put it into practice?
Yeah. I love what you said about the CSC allows us to do neuroscience differently here, because it really does, right? The idea of community-based learning and community engaged research, right? That the CSC does so well has really become almost like a bedrock of I think what makes our program so special. And a lot of those programs flourish because of this, what both of you touched on in your introductions, in terms of like this deeper understanding of self. And I know, Arafat, in a lot of your writings that I've had the pleasure of reading through the Sslp, you really did such a beautiful job kind of articulating your thinking about how the understanding of neuroscience really enhances agency. And I was wondering if you could share just a little bit of your thinking on that, a little bit of your experience during the Sslp, but also for whatever reason, it's still really difficult to hear you. So I don't know if it's possible to just lean in a little bit closer or speak up a little bit. So sorry about that. Okay, thanks.
I really hope this is better. You guys could hear me more clear. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so my experiences in the Sslp, I've had the honor of participating in 2 different experiences. One in which I was assisting at the Mid-Coast Community Alliance at Maine, that really targeted a community that was susceptible to high suicide rates and depression rates. So it was a lot of mental health issues that needed to be addressed. So in that area, and what was surprising to me was that it was with students that were from a pre-K to like a middle school range. So that was very concerning. Being able to talk to those students and understand children have such a beautiful kind of innocence that you would find refreshing as an adult or like as a college student, something that you would miss. So speaking to them and asking them about their emotions and trying to understand how their neural pathways has gotten to their current thought process now. It reminded me of many things that I learned in my neuroscience class. One thing about, like I said before, neural pathways and how they're constantly being strengthened and weakened. The rate at which you're able to come to an immediate thought shows that that neural pathway is really strong and is something that you continuously are practicing. However, when you are introduced to a new idea or something that you're not familiar with, it takes a while for you to get used to it. Your brain has to constantly increase that exposure for you to become used to that idea. So talking to students and understanding how the community and how connections with their family members or connections with themselves and how well they are able to rationalize their emotions at such a young age had a huge effect on how they were performing within that community. So speaking with those elementary school students and middle school students and trying to understand why they thought the way that they did. And my backgrounds and the neurological knowledge that I have really helped me understand that it's more of the influence of having that individual knowledge and how that knowledge of the self has a huge influence on how you express and how you make friends. Your friends and all the people in your life are a reflection of who you are. So being able to have a solid understanding of who you are allows you to flourish within that community. And so young children are still beginning to find that person, that who they think that they are. So in the community, especially within COVID, when they were cut off from their friends at school, and a lot of low-income communities were having a hard time having adequate Wi-Fi or even just communication with their parents, if their parents would have to go out and work more to make ends meet. These cut-offs of neural communications and these social networks had a huge effect on how they thought their own worth was. So being able to incorporate what I thought, being able to incorporate my knowledge of neuroscience and comparing that to how children look at their view of the self is something that I've found astonishing and has actually influenced me to participate in another SSLP focusing on children again. I'm pre-med and I thought that I would do something with medicine, but seeing how the children are in dire need of help, especially now, and how communication and development of children has been severely impacted by COVID-19 has influenced me to again help and like target my audience towards young students again. And my summer session, my winter session, SSLP, has been talking to middle schoolers in New York, Buffalo, New York, and making sure that they are supported, making sure that they have the necessary resources now that schools are opening back up. So understanding and being aware, and in my own experiences, my new neurological pathway of seeing the preferential option for children, in my opinion, and seeing how they are a target audience that I haven't really thought about. I thought people that were having COVID were what needed the most help, but now my new exposure has shown me that children are one of the biggest risks factors of COVID-19 that not many people are really thinking about. And being able to have that privilege to learn more and to speak more about their struggles and to provide exposure so other people are more aware is what SSLP has really taught me, and my neurological knowledge on the importance of the self. As college students too, I know everyone says that when you go to college, you change your mind about a lot of stuff because you're exposed to so many more people. So the knowledge of your understanding of your own person is constantly changing as you get older with the more people that you are being exposed to. So having an understanding of who you are presently, and also understanding that who you are now and who you are 10 years later might not be the same, and being okay with that, right? Being okay with change, being okay with changing your mind, to evolving, to become a better person. Those things has, through the neurological knowledge that I have been taught through the NSBH department, has really made me, I think, more mature than I was a year ago, but also like it increased my exposure to looking at my community and really helped me effectively become a positive aspect of those experiences.
Yeah, that was beautiful. And what a richness of and diversity of experiences too. You touched on a couple of things that I think are really central, not only in the language of Catholic social tradition, but what we understand about nervous system development and overall nervous system health. You talked about how the shift in social situation for these young children, that what surprised you or struck you the most is the impact on their worth, right? And so from a developmental perspective, it's critically important, and we don't talk about it very much, but critically important to understand that the brain actually has expectations from the environment, and that central to a child's not only sense of safety and well-being, but also then kind of those form the constructs of worth and efficacy are relationships, right? The physical people in our lives that support us and love us and show up for us. And in the absence of the consistency of that, that starts to kind of destabilize what we would consider the foundations, the neural framework foundations for so many skills that we just expect with age. But it turns out it doesn't happen just because we get older, right? Those skills emerge as a result of really complex interactions with our environments. The interest in medicine versus development, that like I would agree. And I think that this informs maybe a little bit. I don't want to, well, maybe I'll ask that leading question, Connie, in terms of specifically when we're thinking as a director of undergraduate studies for the poverty studies minor, when we're thinking about poverty and we're thinking about the language of CST, not necessarily from a neuroscience framework, but having that in the background about neurobiological expectations. What, from a poverty studies perspective, like what evidence or how do you see these things really integrating with an approach to poverty studies, right? Like, why is developmental neuroscience relevant in a poverty studies pocket? What additional insight might that provide for problem solving or engagement? Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. So, at the CSC, we spend most of our time and energy focusing on people with what neuroscience would call high stress dose people, who've had high, environments of toxic stress, or people who are most at risk of experiencing additional adverse childhood experiences or trauma. We weren't using that language in the 1980s when the center was founded, but it's been a really helpful layer of understanding to add to the language we do use in the Catholic social tradition. We talk about the poor and vulnerable people, and neuroscience gives us more precise language about what those vulnerabilities are, and also gives us insight on healing. The study of neuroscience and trauma leads us to, I think, also acknowledge and understand the buffers that help protect us against those adverse childhood experiences and build resilience. It gives us specific language and strategies. Buffers are those, for folks, are those human and material resources that help protect and heal. And the center's always been about that. We don't want to, just address a problem. We want to build healing and protection into the system. So maybe the only thing I don't like about the poverty studies minor is the name itself. I think it can give the wrong impression of what we do. The minor isn't about developing academic experts who study poverty in some impersonal, empirical way from some, perch of perfection, right? We're not kind of out here looking at others. It's really about being present with those experiencing and addressing poverty. Presence is everything. It's about being broken together, right? Not about that perfection. And experiential learning requirement for the minor is really the heart of what we do. Students can't just sit in these beautiful classrooms and study poverty from afar. We have to go out and first do our homework and understand the people and populations, the people and places that we're going to engage, and to build up our intellectual humility to know how little we know, actually, but to prepare to go out in the margins, to prepare intellectually and spiritually for that journey, right? And it's not just the intellectual journey that's has the most impact, really. We want to go meet people where they are, where the pain and suffering takes place. And our job is to listen, that's the most important thing that we do. We listen to people tell their stories. We assist in ways they ask us, invite us to assist. And we don't just study poverty, we really study impoverishment, the systems that make both poverty and wealth sticky in the United States. We ask what buffers, again, to use a neurological perspective, what are the buffers that wealth can buy, and what traumas can't wealth prevent? We're all susceptible to these traumas. How can we acknowledge that and work together and kind of look at ourselves and our own place in those systems and ask what power we have to create a more just world? And neuroscience helps us think in those terms and give us those, those tested and tried strategies for intervention so that our presence and our actions really have the kinds of outcomes that we want for a better world.
Yeah, and the focus on, and there are a number of I think minor courses of study, maybe a handful of major courses of study that offer these experiential learning opportunities. And I just think, again, in the context of really understanding, right, with another term in Catholic social tradition is solidarity, which I have a fantastic quote for later if we can get to it. But this idea of living, right? That you can't. That I love what you said about poverty studies is not about studying poverty, right? It's about experiencing, right? It's about how can we reattribute social bias? How can we redistribute resource? How can we walk in witness to really understand, right? And again, from a neuroscience perspective, that just has to do with like diversity of brain architecture, right? There's no hole in my brain that would represent experiences or information that I don't have. So I don't understand you until we have a conversation. I don't know what your life is like until we're able to witness one another and share that exchange. And so I want to read a couple of quotes. So I'm going to be looking at a paper. Sorry, but again, I think this kind of this living piece is so embedded in so many faith traditions and just the way that we discuss morality in general. But across the board, faith traditions can be filled with love. In Dorothy Day's The Long Loneliness, she stated that we cannot love God unless we love each other. Mother Teresa said any number of things, but one quote, and it's a longer one, but it has to do with Arafat's reference to children. Today, we see more and more that all the suffering in the world has started from the home. Today we have, I know I cry because I love kids. Today we have no time even to look at each other, to talk to each other, to enjoy each other, and still less to be what our children expect from us, what the husband expects from the wife and what the wife expects from the husband. And so more and more we were out of our homes and less with each other. And the language of faith is often echoed in language of social justice. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. And so there's this richness and interconnectedness that really, again, in different disciplines, might seem like those disciplines might be contrary in some ways, but I'm wondering about what opportunities, Connie, you think might exist from just a disciplinary perspective, right? Neuroscience and CSC might seem like this odd parent, or not odd parent, but odd couple, right? What other opportunities do you see, right? If like sky's the limit, like how can we engage different disciplines to use this kind of engaged method to help educate and experience and diversify for problem solving and, you know, ingenuity?
Hey, the odder the better, I think. That's where innovation happens, and where you have to really slow down and listen, and you're not making assumptions, that you're talking to your own people, right? And so that odd pairing, I think, is what we really enjoy at the CSC. There are opportunities for every discipline, I think, to work with or through the CSC to build social cohesion and address social problems. You know, you have to work on both sides of that equation. You can't just go out erasing problems without replacing that negative space with positive opportunities. You know, it's working both sides of that to really build community up. And the CSC has a long history of being a catalyst for courses and initiatives that create change. So, you know, in our decades of history, we have sponsored, funded, incubated, or launched so many important initiatives, I think, such as the Kroc Institute for Peace Studies, now in the Keough School, the Center for Civic Innovation in the College of Engineering, the Spanish Community Engaged Learning Program in Arts and Letters, the South Bend Entrepreneurship and Adversity Program, which is a new business program that's in Keough. Not to mention all the projects sponsored by our community impact grants. You can see our website to see, you know, we love the odd entry, right? That gets us excited. Somebody's seeing something we hadn't done yet. And we really invite and want to support those kinds of entries. So for example, one of those was the ND-led innovation team that helps detect lead poisoning in children. We know that children can have, you know, brain development issues if those kinds of early lead poisoning issues aren't addressed early on. So we really want to support those kinds of initiatives. So, you know, we nurture and invest in diverse coalitions of people. That's the other, you know, I think piece of this. It isn't just us and one other group, but let's, you know, bring multiple people together to work on these problems and to measure the impact and to improve our methods. You know, having more people at the table is going to make us sharper and better, I think, in our listening and in our responding. And we think people who are most vulnerable deserve the best, right? They need more. And so we need to give them more. We need to give them Nancy and Arafat. We need to give them our best faculty and students. And so we try to nurture that in a number of ways. And Nancy, you came early on to our Community Engagement Faculty Institute. That's one of the ways we do that. We invite faculty from all different disciplines, including graduate students and community partners, to come and, you know, really give themselves over for 3 days for a deep dive into really understanding the theory and practice of community engagement. We go out into the community and, you know, we really build a sense of relationship and support among one another, because the hard work is hard, you know, it's draining in a lot of ways. And the more we can build a community among ourselves, I think the stronger we'll be, and the more diverse and inclusive that community is, the stronger our outcomes will be as well. So our door is open to all. Hospitality is one of our core values at the center, and we mean that on, you know, on a campus level and the community level.
I remember I participated when I participated in the Faculty Institute, and it really, I mean, it changed the way that I think about education, and I think about, you know, sustainability, and I think about engagement. And it was such a seminal seminal experience and provided, like, again, the ideas, right, that these structures exist, and you guys do such an incredible job and have launched so many sustainable programs, right? Sometimes you need to see that example to really ignite the spark. And it was so life-changing. And some of, and we've talked about it a number of times, but I just really want to take a moment to elevate this interconnectedness. So whether it's community capacity building, whether it's the neurobiological need of children for bigger people to take care of them, that humans really are an interconnected species. We talk about it as like humans are a social species, but we really are interconnected. We don't outgrow the need for each other. And I think many of us in this in the last 12 months, right, that I think we all have probably a different experience of how much social relationship matters in overall health and well-being. We've probably all been a little bit deprived of that in the last 12 months. And so, Arafat, I was wondering, from just like a cultural perspective, there's all these narratives about like when you're grown up, right? When you're grown up, we're dependent when we're a kid, and when we're grown up, we're independent. And we were in class. One of the classes that I teach this semester, one of the students mentioned recently, she's like, we really need to change this framework from being dependent to independent, right? Because an independence implicitly says like, I shouldn't need anybody else. I should be able to do this all on my own. I shouldn't have to ask for help. I shouldn't be feeling this way because I'm independent. What she offered was, we really need to change this framework from being dependent to independent to something that's a lot more accurate, that we go from being dependent to interdependent. And I wonder if you could maybe unpack, you've touched on this in some of your writings as well, and if you could unpack this kind of with a specific eye towards, kind of in this in-between stage, right? Like, you're considered a grown-up, and what is it like from a dependence versus independence versus interdependent from an experience perspective?
Yeah, so when I think, like, looking at that question, going from a structure to a function, that's what I've been taught. So a structure to function format, understanding the structure of our brains and how things that we were taught at a young age, like I mentioned before, are social networks, on how that really affects the people that we're first surrounded with, our family, how that affects our thoughts of other people, that necessity to feel as if you're part of a group, a small family group or a group within your friends, that need to feel part of a community is very, very important within humans. And that is one of the huge influences when it comes to becoming an adult. That stigma, or like that idea that an adult should be independent, is going completely against how the brain would function. The brain functions by mirroring other brains, the mirror neurons thought. When someone does something and then you copy them and it's intrinsic, you don't really think about it. For example, if you yawn and I yawn right after, that's an example of how my brain is trying to copy what you're doing in a way to form better and closer connections, because familiarity is one of those aspects of forming close bonds and therefore forming stronger social connections. So the thought that an adult has to be independent really strips away one of the fundamental aspects of human or brain function. Being told that you should be functioning on your own takes away that idea that humans are social beings, and that is something that is agreed upon by all scientists. The idea that understanding how your spirituality plays into that, many major religions talk about how the preferential option for the poor, helping people out, being open. Spirituality is not about shutting yourself out, focusing on yourself, because by focusing on others, you are also enhancing your individuality. So it's that idea of interdependence on the community, and the community has aspects of, has qualities in which you can use and therefore grow. We do not become good people on our own. We look at good people and we see how they have a positive aspect on the community, and we desire to be like them. Therefore, we try to mimic what they are doing. Everything is a learned process. By understanding the neurobiological aspects of how we desire to form connections, cry when someone else is crying, even though we don't know why they're crying, these strong connections
playing into spirituality, how these things are qualities that make you more empathetic to your community, that make you more passionate when it comes to solving community issues.
Yeah.
What I've seen is that these are all interconnected. And so taking away that core value that a human is not a human without being around people who make them the best version of themselves, right? Especially in college when we are, like I said earlier before, being exposed to so many new people. If I come in with one mentality, personally, I'm going to expose myself a little bit. But me, I have really thought that physical health is very important, and I haven't had much time to really look at the importance of mental health. It really started in high school, but coming to college and seeing, especially now with COVID and how stress levels are increasing, sleeping hours for a lot of college students are decreasing, and seeing how many students are facing constant anxiety attacks or periods of depression. Mental health is the center stage of our campus community right now, and trying to provide those supports for students is one of the reasons why neurobiological understanding is so important in providing that help. So me not knowing how important that was, and then coming to college and being exposed to so many different opportunities and different students and different experiences, seeing all of that has made me a better person, made me more knowledgeable. It has made me evolve into someone that is understanding of a new field of science that I have not been aware before. So taking away that core idea that you cannot be who you are without people around you really just doesn't make you into a mature adult. You cannot be that adult that you want to be without, using or having that support of your surroundings. So that idea that you should be alone or that you should mature on your own is really, really hurtful towards students, young children, because we're teaching them that as they're getting older. And college students, we're learning this as we're getting older. This idea really hurts humanity as a whole. Not only will the people of the poor be severely hurt, but us in our own developmental process will be stagnant as well.
Yeah, you said a couple of things in there. I love that, like you can't become a good person on your own, right? And that's totally appropriate developmentally, right? Like if we don't have kind of altruistic behavior and community sense focused behavior to learn from and to mirror as we grow, we will never learn those behaviors, right? And also you can't be a good person on your own, even as we age, because of this interdependence, right? We can't stay healthy. We're not engaged, right? We don't continue to express those behaviors on our own either, and how deeply interconnected that is to overall mental health and well-being. And I think especially right now, right, another cultural narrative that really needs to be, we've outgrown, right, is this taboo around mental health, right? That like I think now is a moment we all get to ask whether we just go back to the way it was, or we take this moment to really think about how we look to evidence so that we can start doing things differently and be better caretakers of each other, better stewards. So with that, I want to thank you guys so much. I think it's time to open it up to questions that have come in from the audience. So I think that they just show up somewhere, perhaps in the chat. I go to the Google form. Is that correct? I will go to the Google form. But it only allows me to submit a question on the Google form. Okay, that's a different form. All right, here we go. Okay, ready. Thanks for all of your patience. So the initial premise is that our brains are a situated organ, that it is this development and responses that are influenced and informed by experience. To apply the analogy of a tree growing, how does this differ from the response of a tree to injury, covering a wound with new growth? That's an awesome question. The tree didn't learn this, but rather reacted biomechanically in response to the injury. What evidence has led to this premise that our brains function differently? This is a beautiful question. So so injury. So this is the idea to me, right? Thinking about the tree, right? And there are multiple developmental processes that happen. So if we think about a tree and we think about a storm coming through and blowing off the branches, part of normal development and part of normal what's called neuroplasticity is the idea that the brain is constantly changing. And in general, biology is not wasteful. And so when this massive storm comes through and blows off the weak branches, right, that's a normative process called pruning, right? So the brain prunes unused parts of neurons all of the time. And I don't know if this is what was meant, but when we talk about injury, I would like to kind of bring that back to the idea of maybe adversity, right? When we talk about, and adversity really, yes, we have the seminal ACEs study, adverse childhood experiences, that quantitatively looked at 10 different events. But what we understand now, after a couple more decades of research, is that adversity from a developed nervous system perspective really has to do with unbuffered stress dose, right? So Connie mentioned these buffering things, that buffering comes from resources, buffering comes from people. So if we think about adversity as stress dose, that to me would be like the injury, right? The injury of the tree. And what we understand from a neuroscience perspective is that particularly in the lack of resource, right? The diversity of branches, how many branches there are, how thick the forest is in general, right? The greater resource, the greater capacity, the greater buffering capacity of an individual that an individual has access to, the more likely they're able to recover from that injury, right? And adversity from a neural framework isn't, right? The world has never been a safe place, right? Ever, right? And so resilience actually arises from or out of the diversity of neural networks. The flexibility, like the diversity of experience, literally creates different ways for information to be processed. We developed skills across the board to weather well in good times and in bad times. And that's really what the literature supports, that performance increases with some adversity, right? In the presence of these buffering systems, that adversity actually increases performance across levels of stress. And so that's really what resilience is all about, why protective factors become so important. And it just so happens that like people are the best protective factors of one another. All right, please define neuroadaptation. And is this the process involved where brain circuits are required by ACEs? Please define neuroadaptation. And is this the process involved when brain circuits are required by ACEs? Neuroadaptation. Neuroadaptation, let's think about it in terms of plasticity, right? That like adapting to your environment is a process of being aware of the sensory information coming in, using that, right? So we have this kind of prerequisite framework of neural scaffolding, right? New information comes in. We try to problem solve that new information based off of the skills that we already have. And then we adapt, right? We change our behavior. Some literature, right? We talk about different kinds of plasticity. So there's the learning and memory kind of plasticity, that's Hebbian plasticity. There's homeostatic plasticity. There's like structural plasticity. And all of those, I think, are forms of adaptation, right? But the brain's number one job above anything else is survival. And so the brain will always place the behaviors that are required for survival in a particular environment, whether they're socially acceptable, right? That's a different kind of question. Brain's number one job is survival. And if my survival is in jeopardy, if I'm hungry, if I'm cold, right, my behaviors will be very different than if all of those basic needs and resources were met. So again, I think context becomes really, really important when we're talking about, I don't know, like social context and behavior is really, really different. It's a different conversation than when we're talking about the way that the brain adapts to environment and external stimuli.
Yeah, and if I could add something really quickly,
Yeah.
the conversation that actually made me had about children and how the phrase just say no when it comes to bullying is not as easy as anyone would think, you know. A child knowing that they have support systems within classrooms or within the administration is much more, it's much more easier for them to tell a bully to stop bullying them because they know that they have that support system or that social group. But then if it's in a place where adults or people that do have authority are not really being that resource, then of course that child would not really, you know, stand up for themselves. So that really reminded me of that type of how that could be applied socially and through human relationships as well.
Yep, absolutely. Because we have this, a colleague of mine uses the term, he's a clinician, neuroception, right? Is this broad capacity for our brains to always be integrating the diversity of sensory input all of the time. And all of that information kind of contributes to our well-being. And and so with that, we take those cues and we adjust our behaviors accordingly. And it ultimately becomes very little about what people say, but about the skills that we build by example, right? You can't be a good person on your own. I think maybe we have time for one more question. How does age affect neuroplasticity, and are children more neuroplastic? Yes, they are. Yes, they are. So neuroplasticity declines with age, but you can teach an old dog new tricks. It literally requires, so if you look at energy resource, doing anything, we require oxygen and glucose and, you know, all those metabolic nutrients. So it literally will take more oxygen and glucose to learn new things as we age, but that's why effort becomes so important, right? We can always learn new things no matter how old we get. And it turns out that the more that we continue to learn, the easier learning remains because we maintain the diversity in kind of the synaptic architecture. It's a child's job, right? They are obligate, their brains, neurodevelopmentally, are obligate to learn from their environment. They have no choice. They're obligate to attach. They're obligate to learn. They're always looking for all of the entirety of the sensory experience, back to this kind of species expectant experience and critical periods of development. They're always looking for that. And I think the thing that is a little bit of a mind bend is that their nervous system is expectant of those experiences. So in the absence of those, the further, again, the distance between the expectation and the experience, the more vulnerability there is in the system because of this neuroplasticity and developmental expectation, that the young brain is just, that's all that it wants from the environment is to be engaged and to be able to be explored, but also to be mentored, right? The importance of social connectivity, because children don't survive, infants don't survive, children don't survive without direct and consistent care. So I think that establishes, and we'll definitely explore that more in session number 2. And so I think that, thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your busy days to come and spend this hour with us. It's been really, really just, what a pleasure. Thank you to everybody at ThinkND and the Science Lab and all the people in the background that worked so hard to produce this. For the end of this session, so there are going to be a couple of things that are happening. So we're going to wrap up the official session. Those of the individuals that are staying live on the session, I'm going to play a song. It's a little bit of an atypical thing to do, but we're going to play a piece of music. And what I'd like everybody to do is maybe just close their eyes and listen to the music. Don't worry about getting all of the words down or anything like that. But what I hope to be able to do is play this same piece of music over our 3 weeks together. And just what I want you to be aware of, what does it mean now? What does it mean after week 2? How does that meaning change after week 3? So again, we're not taking a test, right? This is not an academic process, but really just like, what is the experience of what the lyrics mean, what the music feels like, and how might that change over our time together? If you are watching this podcast pre-recorded, there'll be a link in the description to the piece of music